Hello and welcome to Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's top stories. I'm Simon Evans and joining me tonight we have comedians Josh Howie and Nick Dixon. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you? All right?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, Nick?
Yes, loving life.
Absolutely. Well, what's not to love? How's your health?
It's all right. It's all right. It's complicated.
It's not been great lately, has it?
I think it's all right.
Gonna make it through.
I've had all the tests that the King recommends. So I think
You
it's
get
all right.
better every time you have like your podcast to record or you do a live event. Suddenly you're better. And when you have a shift here, you're sick again.
Yeah, it's weird.
Psychosomatic. He doesn't like being challenged.
Well,
Just let him have the last say.
I have to do the live events because there's a paying audience. This doesn't matter.
That's true. Anyway, let's have a look at the front pages. The Daily Mail kick us off. Hundreds of high-risk flights land in the UK unchecked. One of them contained Joanna Lumley by the look of it. The Telegraph, US moves to block Israeli offensive. The Guardian, stand with me. Yulia Navalnaya vows to continue her husband's fight. The Express, Prime Minister, I know it's been tough, but our plan will boost Britain. iNews, Labour set to pledge triple lock on UK state pension. And finally, the Daily Star, Indiana Jones and the indomitable Mrs. Mop. Those were your front pages. So let's kick off with the Daily Mail, Josh.
Hundreds of high-risk flights land in the UK unchecked. So this is another loophole, essentially private jets. And they come in and they don't have a border control, so they just But the difference is it's OK because it's rich people.
Yeah.
It's rich gangsters and drug dealers and people being sex trafficked.
So do they not have to go through any sort of customs at all?
Well, 20% do.
OK.
Or supposedly.
So it's a sort of spot check type thing?
That's the idea, but they're saying that high-risk flights have been just basically getting through.
Yeah.
Without any
So what
checks.
is the serious risk? Is it cocaine and or people actually bringing in arms?
Yeah, it could be trafficking victims, extremists, gangsters.
Yeah.
Really anybody. We don't know. That's the point.
I suppose it has to be worth the expense of running a private jet.
Yeah,
So you
so they're
wouldn't
rich
just be
people.
bringing in loads of B&H, to get past customs.
They might be doing that as well.
Yeah.
And a little extra bottle of whiskey or something.
Yeah. But I suppose, on the other hand, if you're going to do the private jet anyway, you might say, oi.
Well, you know what? They're paying... How much
Ed.
they're paying to come over on the boats? They're paying... if they pulled all their money together,
That's
they're
true.
already paying thousands of pounds for that.
Yeah.
It's probably equivalent, really.
It's actually true. There might even be a nice little racket we could get onto there. Anything on that, Nick?
I just want to know, when can we call this an invasion? You know what I mean? Like they're now coming in planes. They've got boats.
I don't regard the private jet bit as the most worrying in the way that sort of suggests to me those people are probably economically an upside.
Well, you say that, but it says it means that gangsters, illegal immigrants, trafficking victims, and even extremists may have entered the UK. I don't say it says even extremists. Like, Don't you think some of those categories might also be extremists? Do you know what I mean? But
It's
even
quite interesting. I was just reading our book club this month. We're doing a book called Julia, which is a rewriting of 1984 from the perspective of his girlfriend Julia, written by a woman called Sandra Newman, and certain aspects of it crop up. Sometimes it intersects with the original and then it departs. And there's a bit where they have to be asked when he thinks he's joining the Brotherhood whether he'd be willing to do certain things to demoralise the Big Brother's reign and the viability of the party. And they're all so obviously things that are happening on a huge scale at the moment. It's quite interesting. Introducing pornography.
I was just waiting for...
And interfering with children and venereal disease.
If I ever read a book, I'll check that one out.
Yeah.
I was waiting for when that came back to the relevance of this story, but it never quite got there.
Well, it's kind of demoralisation. It's the thing, our foreign enemies, that's another one of them, giving succor and support.
Just letting everyone in. Right.
Just basically making you feel like your country has no control over itself anymore,
Well, this is it. Every day there seems to be another loophole that's revealed.
Yeah. Hey-ho, maybe the Telegraph will cheer us up.
Yes, because it's got men and women's brains work differently. Scientists prove. Here it is. Lewis is gutted that he's not in tonight. This is great news for misogynists. When Ron Burgundy said that men and women are different, that is a scientific fact. It now is. I mean, it's Stanford University, and they're looking at the hotspot areas, the default mode network, an area of the brain thought to be the neurological centre for self, which is interesting, because self is a sort of disputed philosophical concept. But anyway, apparently it's real, and it's different between men and women. And it's all, the limbic system is also implicated, which helps regulate emotion. I'm saying nothing. Memory, and deals with sexual stimulation, and the striatum, which is important in habit forming and rewards. Anyway, And there's implications for how women view themselves and interact with people and recall past experiences. So. Yeah, we are different. It's official.
It's interesting what you say about the self being... It is, I think, fair to say it is an illusion in a way. That doesn't mean it isn't real, if you know what I mean. It's like, it's a real sense that we have. It's obviously created in the brain. The question is whether or not when you really dwell on it, can you actually sort of find anything fundamental, you know, and hard there. But
I was reading a piece...
Is it different between men and women? Is that what they're saying?
That's what they're saying, yeah. They might have a different default mode network. Yeah. Which is essentially the self-con.
This is huge. Well, the big one is how they recall past experiences. Now, anybody who's got a partner will know that women remember things incorrectly.
Yeah.
And this is...
And use them against you years later.
As to why.
Yeah. Default mode network came up in a book I was reading recently, and I can't remember it, but I'm going to work on
you with your constant humble brags about books.
The self thing fascinating, because I think women get a lot of their sense of self from mirror... Do you know what I mean? How do other people see
society?
Literally the mirror neurons. How are they seen? Is this sexist? I don't know. Whereas men have a sense of self through self-actualisation.
I was reading a thing the other day suggesting that, you know, this idea of us even having a self is fairly recent. In the way that we do with this introspection of the West might be sort of relatively recent in some ways, so maybe it might not last forever. Go on.
I just say it's such an interesting time because we've had this movement for 20, 30 years of men and women are exactly the same.
Yes.
And now it's sort of, we're going, no, men and women are actually different. And now we're seeing some of the scientific reasons why.
It's obviously going to have an impact on the trans debate, isn't it? Because if there are female-bodied people who can demonstrate that they have male-bodied brains, male-orientated brains in this sense, they will have a bit more of a rock to stand.
Well, the idea is that they couldn't because men and women's brains develop differently, so they actually, it pushes the argument further that way.
Yeah. That's assuming anyone listens to the science. I mean, you know, something like the depression argument that it was a chemical imbalance was debunked, and everyone's just acting like it hasn't been debunked, just as an example.
Exercise twice as good for you as any pharmaceutical intervention. Extraordinary. Yeah, never mind that, give me the drugs.
There's another big story.
You want to do the Israel one, Josh?
I'm just saying it happens to be there.
Yeah.
Are we doing that off there? Yeah, go on.
It's Israel moves to US moves to block Israel offensive, and Biden has stepped in here, and he's talking about the move on Rafah. Yeah. And he's saying that basically he's saying that he wants the United Nations to come up with a temporary ceasefire on it. So what do you think, Josh? I'm guessing you're not thrilled about it.
No, I think that who cares what I think? The only people that really matter are the Israeli people and their representatives. This is arguably the final battle. This is the last enclave where Hamas are in control. There obviously are a million civilians there as well, but there are hostages that need to be found, and there are Hamas terrorists that need to be defeated.
And Hamas have no interest in a ceasefire.
No, and they also, what they do have an interest is using their population as shields. And really, the call should be from everybody for Hamas to resign and retire and get back the hostages.
What about The Guardian?
Stand with me, Yulia Navalnaya.
Navalnaya. That's a feminized version. That's how they do it in Russia, right?
Oh, that's how they do it.
I think so, yeah.
That's interesting, OK. Because men and women are different.
Yeah.
Vows to continue husband's fight. This is very brave of her, although she's speaking from an undisclosed location, whatever, but still to put a target on her head after her husband's been murdered and assassinated. And I guess she's putting her forward as a sort of focal point for protest against Putin.
Of course, we don't know that for a fact that he's been murdered or assassinated at this point. It is, I have to say,
Ofcom.
Just ever so slightly, I do find it quite curious that he would just kill him at this precise moment. I don't know how he operates, Putin, or how they do, but the timing's a bit odd, don't you think?
Well, it was a bit suspicious, though, the way he was walking around fine, he was making jokes. The next day he's walking around the yard and he's suddenly ill. A bit suspicious, but I see what you mean.
No, it's definitely suspicious. I mean, in fact, I would say the balance of probability is he's been assassinated, but I don't know whether they do it through some kind of long-term make him ill kind of way, or do you want
well, she said she's going to reveal why Putin killed him. I mean, it's not really that much doubt why he would do it, isn't it? Because he's this bitter rival, he's trying to control a massive country. You know, you could argue it's clean, it's hygienic, there is minimal collateral involved. You know, the way Putin tends to eliminate opposition is extraordinarily surgical. How do you think they'll do it with Trump? Yeah, very good question. Well, they're attempting to do it through the courts, aren't they, at the moment, which would be probably the most humane. Can we get in 30 seconds on the Daily Star? We can, but it's a little bit more detailed than they normally have. It's Indiana Jones and the indomitable. I thought I was going to get that right, but I didn't. Mrs. Mop. I bottled it. Anyway, it's about the Holy Grail. So British spies attempted to snatch the Holy Grail in a real-life Indiana Jones-style plot that was foiled by a Spanish cleaning lady. Bombshell new research has revealed.
Wow.
It was in 1939 as the Spanish Civil War was ending. This is not your normal quick like weather and seagulls and boffins. This is very detailed, and I've only just started to read
Grail,
it.
so they think it does exist still.
Yeah, it's like the difference between men and women. It's real.
Wow. And like another thing to do with women, very hard to find.
Please,
Anyway,
no more sequels to Indiana Jones.
As the front page is all done. In part two, we have the latest from the dinghy of death. We have pointless election speculation and Republicans wrangling over a mere $95 billion in military aid in America. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly
that
right.
growth.
And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you,
Sure.
and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
And welcome back to Headliners, your first look at Tuesday's top stories. So, Josh, the Telegraph kicking us off in this section with a deadly, dismal dinghy failing to make it to Dover.
Nice alliteration there. Dinghy pilot Ibrahima Bar guilty over Channel migrant deaths. This in 2002. He's a Senegalese migrant. 43 people got on the boat. It was supposedly only would fit 20, and it was like a homemade, totally inappropriate thing for crossing the channel. He's claiming that he was ordered to do it, but they've said, no, you could have just turned them down. 4 people at least drowned, obviously, which is very sad. And this is an interesting development, and I think a really good idea is, immediately as the people get off the boat, find out who exactly was driving the thing, and arrest them and put them in jail.
Right.
And I think soon enough that would deter people.
Yeah, it'd be
from
cheaper
coming out.
than
I think,
sending him to Rwanda,
I
wouldn't
think
it?
that
Yeah.
could be. The question is, of course, once his time is served, where is he going to become Christian and settle here?
I suppose also you'd have to trust everyone to be truthful about it, wouldn't you?
Well,
I mean,
maybe they have
crazy
to take evidence,
obfuscate
see
that,
who's
but,
holding the thing. Yeah.
It's usually, I mean, I say usually, but quite often they collapse or some, they go over halfway out anyway and have to be rescued by various Coast Guards or RNLI or whatever, don't they? But
yeah.
I suppose it's something. I suppose the culpability comes from the fact that he was getting a free crossing because he'd agreed to pilot it. But
something along those lines.
It's an odd thing to then say, well, then you
take responsibility.
You take responsibility for determining that it's overladen as well. But
no, but because he looked at it, he said it was overladen, but he didn't then pull out, and he's claiming that the smugglers made him do it, but it's only his claim. There's no other evidence for that, so they've dismissed that. So it was built for 20 people. I'm surprised more people didn't die. It was built for 20 people. They had 40-something on there. I mean, it was punctured at one point. They were navigating with a phone. I mean, I'm surprised there weren't more deaths.
It's almost like Shackleton and the small boat crossing, isn't it, to South Georgia?
But I agree. Now that he's been done for manslaughter, that surely you'd hope would put some people off.
Yeah, well, that would be a good start. So express now, Nick, what sounds like a somewhat wishful speculation of a hung parliament based on the Reform Party.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah, it's a stark warning for Labour that Reform UK could wreck Starmer's dream of a majority, and this comes from Labour Together. And Josh Williams, this guy, is saying he's the director of Labour Together. He says something quite interesting. He says, there's a long way to go. As the old saying goes, there can be many a slip between cup and a lip. It's actually twixt. As you would know, Simon, obviously.
I have used that very often, yeah.
That doesn't surprise me at all. So he's saying, let's not get complacent, because it could be a landslide, it could be a working majority, or it could even be, as you say, a hung parliament in certain projections, which would be interesting. And there's also soft switches to take into account. They're part of the LGBTQ. No, they're not. They're people that changed. They were going to vote, and they changed back to who they normally vote for. So, yes, you hope Reform could, especially if Farage came back, they could make this impact.
But they could have an impact, but they would surely only take voters away from the Tories. So the worst that would happen would be that they would encourage people who might be too depressed by the Tories to vote Tory, but they would come out and vote Reform. But it still wouldn't be... I mean, it would be only in a seat that would otherwise have been Tory, wouldn't it?
Well, my reading of the article is that if it only would be a hung parliament if the Reform vote collapses.
Yeah.
So if Reform falls out, then there could be a hung parliament.
Or if Reform come to some sort of pre-coalition, pre-vote coalition arrangement
possibly,
with the Tories,
But this is what they say here. So so it's interesting that it's Reform that arguably is holding back more of a balanced parliament in the next election. So
we saw that in the by-election, right? If you'd added the Tories and the Reform, votes together, they would have won.
What we mainly saw was the people just refusing to vote, right? The 20,000 in Wellingborough just going, no, we're not going to vote for the Tories anymore. Yeah. And that's what's probably most likely. But like you say, it's the collapse.
Come out. It could galvanise those people, but then they would have to come to some sort of... I mean, they do occasionally do these things, don't they? Like this kind of tactical voting arrangements beforehand.
Well, yeah, when Farage has said he'll never do that again because of how it went last time.
Would. Over to the Red Sea now, Josh. The Guardian says the Houthis are claiming a palpable hit.
Yeah, Houthis claim cargo ship is at risk of sinking after Red Sea attack. So this is a boat that would come out of the UAE to Bulgaria, and the crew's been evacuated now. It didn't have anything to do with Israel, the ship, and supposedly a missile shot them. Now, costs are going up. Insurance costs in particular are going up. Petrol costs, because they're having to detour around Africa. Yeah. And that also means that less money is going into being made in the Suez Canal by Egypt. So this is an issue, obviously, all around. Yeah.
It's commercial, but it's commercial on a scale that is it becomes a foreign policy concern, isn't it?
It seems like the interesting that the ships that aren't really being targeted are Chinese ships.
Oh,
interesting. It suggests there could be some kind of strange deal there between the Houthis and whatnot. Again, you see this on the weekends about Yemen, and you see people chanting for Yemen and ignoring the fact they've got slaves and they have child soldiers, and the hypocrisy is disgusting.
Why can't the Yemen be more like Oman?
Good question.
Very good.
It's a good one, isn't it? What do you think about putting an Iron Dome over the Red Sea? I mean, that would be the obvious thing to do, wouldn't it?
How would that work?
Well, you basically just need to shoot down Houthi missiles and things, don't you, that are threatening ships.
Yeah, but it's drones and whatnot. I think they should just bomb the Houthis. back to the Stone Age.
Right.
But of course, they're in the Stone Age, so
yeah. Well,
you're a massive
but this is the odd thing, isn't it?
War.
Yes.
They're an example of quite a common sort of phenomenon these days, where you get a bunch of sheep herders who suddenly get their hands on tactical sort of ground-to-air missiles and things. It's one of the many
cause a massive problem.
Yeah,
for the whole
alarming
world.
aspects of the whole thing. Daily Mail, Nick, Joe Biden says he's never seen anything like it, but to be fair, that could be memory issues.
Yes, it happened yesterday. He's forgotten, yeah. Biden says House Republicans are making a big mistake by not approving more Ukraine aid when asked if GOP has blood on their hands for Navalny's death, and reveals he's considering more sanctions on Putin. So, classic long Mail headline. Very interesting, though, because what this is really about is the reluctance on the side of the Republicans to get too involved in funding foreign wars. You know, so the Senate passed a $95 billion aid package, but Mike Johnson, House Speaker, was refusing to bring it up for a vote and demanding a meeting with Biden. Because obviously, following the neocon era of Cheney and Bush, you know, the Republicans got sick of all that. They're in the Trump era now, so they don't want to fund Ukraine. They see our living standards are going down. You know, they're hated by half the country. They're called MAGA fascists and all this. And they look at it and think, why should we pay for Ukraine? And to be fair, they haven't really made the case. You could make a case, pretty obviously, that if Russia, China and Iran and all these countries gain more power and the US reduces in power, then your average American citizen is going to be worse off, less safe, less free. But I don't really hear that case being made. I just hear sort of give us the money now, and they're sort of going, well, why should we?
It does seem to always be expressed in very, very basic, quite old-fashioned sort of Cold War terms, doesn't it? Like, this is your eternal enemy.
Evil.
You know, what do you not understand about not trying to defeat Russia?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense in that, first of all, that money is spent in America. So it facilitates American jobs. Those billions go towards America. And secondly, it's money well spent in that if it's America first and they don't want to involve American troops in NATO, this has been proven to get incredible value for money in terms of running down Russian supplies and defeating them without using Americans dying, basically.
So if anyone's got blood on their hands, I mean, that phrase seems to be being used about Navalny, which I think is just ridiculous. I can't see that you could say that Republicans have got blood on their hands as far as Navalny is concerned.
Biden was asked that, and to be fair, he said he wouldn't use that term.
He wouldn't use that term.
So they're just trying to, it's the press doing what they do. But there's an interesting point there. It's like, yes, in the wake of the Navalny death, does that galvanise support for Ukraine? Or, as Trump has said, does it make it more the case that he's the Navalny figure being persecuted by a political opponent? You know,
and also
that's the way he sees it.
You know, in terms of blood on their hands, I mean, if that is the foreign policy initiative, if that is the benefit, the bonus, the dividend that they're aiming for to run down Russia, then they have got blood on their hands because they're basically feeding Ukrainians into a meat grinder, and they don't care how many Ukrainian young lives are shattered and how much of a nation is left to rebuild, because all they really care about is degrading Russian military capacity.
But Ukrainians, are, to their mind, are fighting for their survival and willing to sacrifice their lives for their nation's survival.
Well, I don't know how many individual choices are being made along those lines. Anyway, diplomacy news in The Guardian now, Josh. Two of the world's most adorable autocrats have got a new love match brewing.
I know. China offers to deepen security ties with Hungary. And they're talking about... this is China's Minister for Public Security, and he says they want cooperation in areas including counter-terrorism and combating transnational crimes and security and law enforcement capacity, all by basically stopping doing what China is doing.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Get them on board. We don't want... closer ties, really. I would say we, as in the West. I don't think...
Europe. Hungary is an interesting outlier in lots of ways, isn't it, within the EU? You might say it's a maverick or even a thorn in the side of the EU. It has closer ties with Moscow than anywhere else in the EU.
And we don't want them having close ties with China, arguably. Being part of that coalition is not good.
But they're quite sceptical about the EU agenda generally.
Yeah. Well, it seems like China's noticed that, and they're sort of coming, hey, you want to come with us? It's because they're not getting on with the EU.
Belt and Road, and it could just
exactly. And they know they don't love Biden, whereas Orban's just being sort of maybe he is tempted by China. He's just being very clear. He's saying we can't interfere in other countries' elections, but would very much like to see President Trump return to the White House. So he's been saying, come back, Trump. I'm going to have to hang out with China if you don't come back soon. That's what he's basically saying.
I see a lot of physiognomy as well. Orban and Xi. No,
Xi, really?
No, I think there's definitely. I think there's probably some rapport there.
Really? No, he means based on their faces are the same. So they have some sort of ancient...
teddy bear faces. Yeah.
Someone's getting assassinated.
We've reached the halfway point in the second half. We are looking forward to an end to fox hunting, an end to disadvantaged kids, and an end to wet weekends in Scarborough. See you in a utopian future in a couple of minutes.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods are
remember,
being
a lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid,
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm, I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. I am all for green protests, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You've got to do it this way instead. Lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support
obvious.
some of these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. But sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. So the Telegraph now, Nick. Bad news for traditional fox hunting, though all the more for the Jolly and Morms of the world to finish off in their wives' kimonos.
Good point, yes. The baseball bat fox hunting will be on the rise. It's Labour vows to eliminate fox hunting, so Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reed promises to close loopholes in the ban to prevent hounds killing pets or livestock. So he wants to toughen the Hunting Act, inevitably brought in during Tony Blair's administration. So we know that Labour attacked the countryside and they hate rural people, and now, completely out of ideas, even before they've got in, they're threatening to bring back fox hunting, as if we haven't talked about it enough in this country.
Just so they can ban it again.
Just so they can ban it even more. But really ban it. It's already sort of banned, but really, really ban it. So it's just it's what we're going to expect from Labour, encroaching on freedoms, attacking groups they don't like, and no new ideas.
So is it, will they ban the fake hunts, the sort of paper trails or whatever they call them, the stink hunts?
They say that they lead to deaths of animals, even livestock. Look, no one wants to see animals ripped apart. At the same time, who cares? I mean, to make this an issue before the election is ridiculous.
It's a very symbolic fight, and it worked for them once, but I can't see it.
People want to be able to afford food and to have a working NHS and to have police that do their job.
Yes.
To focus on this kind of stuff is
And I feel like
it's a
there will be some people who feel strongly about this. There'll be a tiny minority on both sides. It will anger some people, traditionalists, who think that they have, suffered enough. the hunt saboteur kind of people, they are a dwindling... And that's a very old-fashioned version of Labour now, isn't it?
I think it's a luxury issue from a better time.
Yeah.
You know, before Blair completely destroyed the country, we had something like, OK, fox hunting, but now, as Josh says, there's so many other issues. As I'm saying here, affordable housing, access to services, agricultural transition, rural issues, but national issues, there are so many more pressing problems.
It's absolutely... It's funny, you know, there was a thing last week, and I wrote a thing about it in Spiked about, is the countryside racist? It comes up every 6 months. And I was thinking, I think there's always been this kind of fear in the metropolitan areas of the... Do you know folk horror is a kind of genre in cinema and stuff? And that came...
The Wicker Man.
Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. So 2002, I looked it up, was the Countryside Alliance, and there was a lot of kind of Wicker Man-type humour at that time. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of...
Wicker Man bants.
The idea that all countryside communities are inbred and, you know...
It's the Shire, isn't it? It's the attack on the Shire. It's traditional England, and that's what Labour hate more than anything.
I'm afraid you're right. Anyway, Josh...
Good balance.
Josh snipped there. I could resist. Here's an idea that surely no humane, loving, sympathetic Marxist could resist. In The Guardian.
Children's services leaders in England call for national plan for childhood. And the idea is that they would set up like a sort of Department of Children, essentially, to coordinate all these services, education, health, and to deal with things like child poverty and crumbling schools. Seems like a good idea. If they can implement it, I think one of the not, I wouldn't say saddest things, but I think it was bad for this country that Sure Start was closed down by the Tory government. I think they did good. I used to work for them back in the day, and they made an impact on families' lives. Certainly problem families. The idea was...
What sort of thing did Sure Start do then?
Well, they would sort of identify these certain key families in every area that are kind of would have the cycle of, you know, teenage pregnancies and domestic violence and abuse and whatnot. Target them, put a lot of resources into those families to break the pattern. And it worked.
OK.
It really did work. And then they closed those services down. And then, of course, everything goes back to business as usual, which I think is part of the problem of this government over the last 13 years. It has been a sort of cowardice of being able to think long-term, to plan long-term, because there's nothing in it for them. But then we see the results 10 years from now when this generation that's been through COVID...
But nobody's having kids anymore, of course. That's the problem now, isn't it?
Yeah, we're going to get onto that maybe in the next show. But
Speak for yourself.
A couple of things on this. Firstly, when you said Department of Children, I pictured it just sounding like it's all run by children. You open the door... that's
like Bugsy Malone.
More importantly, though, The Guardian here annoy me because they're saying, a generation of youngsters scarred by austerity and the pandemic. And you go, and the lockdown, Guardian, which you pushed. It always really annoys me, the absolute lack of shame or accountability. They were running, like, puff pieces of, like, why I love lockdown, and I'd chill out and eat my sourdough bread. It's like you were...
basically teachers, weren't they, at that point? Exactly that.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were part of it. It's not the only cause, but it's one of them.
Austerity is also one of those words that gets thrown around by The Guardian, which is not to say that we've obviously had lavish public spending, but we have not had austerity for over 10 years now. The definition of austerity is that you reduce the deficit year on year. That just hasn't happened. We've been spending more than we've been receiving in tax revenues. I'm not saying it's been enough. It's not been cosy. A lot of people have been in pain, but you have to use words correctly, you know. They have meanings. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, not to this generation.
Not to The Guardian.
That's true. No child, currently a child, grew up under austerity. Like my kids, maybe. They're at university now. Anyway, here's a good reason why children in the UK are actually suffering. That's in the Daily Mail.
Yeah, this is nuclear families in the UK face higher taxes than almost any other advanced country in the world, report warns. This comes from the Family Hubs network, and they found that the UK ranked 26 out of 32 nations. I'm no expert, but that sounds quite low.
Yeah.
And they're only above the likes of, it says here, Greece, Lithuania and Finland, not my words. But we got a score of 3.5 points, but the winner was the Czech Republic with 193 points. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest. I mean, this is not close. We're almost nil point. Greece has a score of -6. So of all the G7 nations, we were the lowest. So this is shocking stuff. This is just the attack.
And of course, that's totally illusory because nobody in Greece pays those taxes.
Good point. It's an attack on the family. And this is the problem. In the post-Blair era, the Cameron era, Osborne continued to punish family. He had the tax on having larger families. So we've got it so wrong by taxing families. Obviously, we need to encourage families. You mentioned birth rate. We're at 1.5, roughly. We need to be 2.5 for replacement. And here we are taxing families into oblivion. So it's a real problem.
I absolutely agree with you. And, you know, our erstwhile friend Dominic Frisby has written a brilliant book about how you can manipulate the course of a country through fiscal measures, through the taxes you choose to impose and those you don't impose. It's a very subtle way of doing it, much better than any amount of propaganda or you know, criminalising certain behaviours or whatever. It's extraordinary how people do respond to incentives if you get them right. But at the moment, they're all in the wrong direction. It almost feels like it's a deliberate ploy.
Well, it feels like you're being punished.
Yeah.
For having children, punished for being married.
Yeah.
I recently had an insane tax bill that we had to, because we went a tiny bit over a threshold.
Right.
My wife and I we had to pay back the previous year's thing, even though we were a month over it. Suddenly you got to pay the whole year back on top of your normal tax. So you have things like that, and you know, it talks about here about child unfairness and child benefit, increased marriage allowance. There are steps, as you say.
And yet there's this kind of weird thing, isn't there, in this particular issue, that any attempt to create a pro-natalist tax regime is regarded as just like adjacent to Hitler.
Eugenics.
You know, what's wrong with just importing people? You know, as if it's you that's kind of weird about you're like thinking we need to build the nation.
But I wonder if that's changing, or that idea people are more familiar with these ideas. I don't mind paying high taxes as long as you get something for them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
when the money has been wasted on ridiculous things.
But having children and giving them a good start in life, exactly as you said in the previous story, is about the single most selfless and long-term constructive activity that a people can do.
And the best that you could do for your country.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're all in agreement on that one. Let's see if we can have a row here. Telegraph. News of measures introduced to hamper people benefiting financially from second homes. Though, to be honest, anything short of total conflagration will fail to satisfy the Cornish, I think.
No, yeah. So second home owners will need planning permission to let houses on Airbnb. And this because in certain places of the country, certainly in Cornwall, there are real issues with local housing or lack of availability because a lot of them are rented out. And I've had some great holidays in Cornwall, thank you, for exactly using this. This seems like a bit of a blunt hammer to deal with the issue, making now local councils, supposedly anything that's already a second home and is used for Airbnb will be kind of just pushed through.
Right.
Any new properties, this will give the councils the ability to control it.
And yet they're saying Airbnb. I obviously haven't read the small print. Do you think alternative rental agencies will also... I mean, they must be meaning
I think it's just anybody renting out.
But they're using that as a synonym,
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the idea of the government regulating your property, but at the same time, people in areas like mine in the lakes struggle to get enough housing, and Airbnbs don't seem to have the same regulations as small businesses. For example, the fire regulations they seem to get away with, because of course they are ambiguous whether they're a home or a business.
Yeah.
But maybe they should be treated more like businesses.
Well, I mean, it is an example. We've used Airbnb a few times, but, you know, it is obviously an example of a thing where people can be clever and avoid paying tax and can put all kinds of things through as expenses and... you know, I don't know, it does make me feel a little bit uneasy, the way that everything just gets immediately rented out when you're not using it now and that sort of thing. There were well-established businesses that used to make their money by, you know, presenting a well-established offer to the tourist trade, and now I don't know.
Things change. Uber changes. You know, everything changes. But as the point is said here by a representative for this, it says the presumption is that if you shut down all these short-term holiday rentals, that the housing crisis is going to be solved. There's no proof for that.
No.
And they're 100% right. There are not enough houses being built.
No, well, the other problem they have in that regard, I suspect, is that if you don't have enough people coming in as tourists, you know, if you've got a second home and you're not renting it out, then fewer people are going to be visiting the spa, you know what I mean? And so that's going to go out of business as well. You actually want the tourists to be there, don't you?
Which I believe you've seen in Scotland, haven't you? Some issues, they've tried to do something like this there. It's made a massive impact.
Yeah.
I don't know. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's what the WF say.
Reefer madness, to close us out very quickly in The Guardian, Nick. I wouldn't want to be the one to tell Mike Tyson it's reefer madness, of course.
Good point, yeah. Mike Tyson urges Biden to free thousands locked up over cannabis, right these wrongs. So more than 2,000 people, overwhelmingly people of colour in federal jail they'll sentence for conduct that would be essentially legal today, i.e. possessing cannabis and so on. But they hit back, the US government saying, no, it's people actually who have other charges, including drug trafficking. It's not just that they're in for cannabis charges. But Trump was actually better on this. He was quite good on these sort of prison reforms, and, you know, whereas Kamala Harris is famously more draconian on this. So it's interesting. But I would obviously make weed illegal completely, but I do... Illegal, but I do understand that if you've done a minor charge, I wouldn't let people languish in prison forever.
No, it seems crazy. They have, again, all the wrong incentives, don't they, on that front? Although possibly it is also used to extract people from society that are almost certain to do something much worse if you leave them there.
Yeah, and one other point that you wouldn't say to Tyson's face, he, of course, makes money off selling cannabis, which is, you know, he's not completely disinterested. Oh, yeah, massive brand, yeah, he's not completely disinterested.
It knocks you out.
Oh,
nice.
It's a good line to end on. That's part 3 done. In the final wacky free-for-all, we have abuses of the pulpit, parts 1 and 2, pets in food banks, and sacked for snacking on a sarnie. See you in a couple of minutes.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that, first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. Sad times in the Daily Mail now, Josh, as Scots prove unequal to a bit of good old-time religion.
Yeah, ultra-conservative Scottish...
What have I interrupted something there?
No, the national TV interrupted you with your phone.
He's watching a video there.
Save that, yeah.
Ultra-conservative Scottish reverend is blasted for misogynistic Handmaid's Tale style sermon calling for all women to submit to their husbands because it's God's will. This kind of links to an earlier story where this is Reverend Chris Demetriou, the Royth Baptist Church in Fife. essentially did a sermon called Submit and Love. It says here that, quoting from the Old Testament, the Lord Jesus is the head of the church. I'm thinking, I don't remember reading that in the Torah.
That's the Old Testament.
The particular part of it. But he said men and women are equal, but not the same.
Yeah.
What I don't see the
Proven
problem.
by science.
Yeah, as now exactly on the front of the Telegraph. God created male and female to complement each other.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds all right. In marriage, the husband has been given responsibility for leadership. Maybe that seems to obviously be the issue. Certainly not the reality in my household. And for a woman, it's the wife is if she thinks her husband's made a mistake, she should express why, and she's looking out for him and look to persuade him. With her feminine wiles. I added that bit at the end. Again, I don't really see a massive problem with that, but it seems to be this idea of the male being, the husband being the leader.
It's certainly not Handmaid's Tale style, is it?
No.
It's absurd, although maybe that's the paper.
There are some religions one could look to for Handmaid's Tale style stuff, but it won't be Christianity. I mean, Josh says this links to an earlier story. Yes, the Old Testament, although that quote, as you say, that sounded like New Testament, Colossians, I would say. But let me just answer this nonsense about this guy being misogynist and all this kind of thing. This is just normal Christianity. You go back to Adam and Eve, go back to the garden. God punishes Adam. Why? Because it was his responsibility. Although Eve took the fruit, Adam went along with it and didn't check. He tries to blame her. He doesn't take the lead. This is just standard Christianity. But that's basically not allowed in our culture now.
I'd say Judaism, but that's all right.
You've got, all right, well, either. You've got the National Secular Society. They sound a bit biased immediately to me. I mean, it's in their name. They're calling this, they're talking about coercive and controlling behaviour. Look, I haven't read the actual sermon, but the idea of submitting, it doesn't mean in a coercive way. It just means that that's the order of things. A man has responsibility to lead. That's all it means.
And it's funny, isn't it? As you mentioned that, there's quite a lot of that kind of men's rights advice type stuff on Twitter, which tends to, like Jordan Peterson, you can do his voice on this one if you want, which tends to emphasise that the point is that men take responsibility. It's not you get to boss everyone around. It's that it's your fault if things go wrong. So you don't just shuck it off. That's the kind of frame rather than the kind of delegation.
Well, that's what he would argue. They would sort of say this guy's pushing old school misogyny or whatever. The National Secular Society, and they're now reporting the church to the Charities Commission, and the idea being that they get tax breaks because they're a charity. I'd like to see if the National Secular Society is going into any mosques and reporting any hate speech, because we've seen lots of evidence of these hate preachers literally saying, you know, kill Jews
is the
and whatnot.
Secular Society a charity?
Well, but let's see. I'm sure they're happy to sort of take on this
level question.
Let's see if they'll go and do their job where it's a little bit riskier.
They totes
Absolutely. Slightly less traditional Christian views now in the Telegraph, Nick.
Yeah, this is Cathedral apologises as transgender activists eulogise at funeral as mother of all... Can I say that word? Oh, it's on the screen. Yeah. Can I? Yeah. Whores, apparently. So, I didn't know we could say whores. Yeah. It's. Can we say that at 5 a.m? I don't know. Well, we'll find out when we get an email from HR, but... It wouldn't be HR, would it? Anyway, the point is, this is St. Patrick's...
self-identified as a whore. If you were using it as a...
it's not me saying it.
No,
It's not like Lewis. So it's St. Patrick's in Manhattan, and they had this... Look, ostensibly it's a funeral. It really seems like activism, because you've got hundreds of people chanting. They're wearing fishnet stockings and miniskirts, and they're chanting about the W word that I'm still not convinced I can say. Yes, so it's another desecration of a Christian church. We've just seen the silent disco at Canterbury Cathedral. This is another example of just the humiliation and destruction of Christian sacred spaces.
That Canterbury Cathedral knowingly booked...
They did it themselves, yes.
Whereas this cathedral were tricked. It was just the space was booked for a eulogy, and I don't... Didn't have a load of whores. I don't think, but it was like a memorial, afterwards.
Yeah, and it was the footage was put online. It was people sort of dancing in the aisles and using these words, and it's about a former sex worker who champions trans rights.
Were they even ostensibly Catholic, or was it absolutely just desecration?
They don't sound very Catholic. They might
identify as a Catholic.
But there is that odd thing, isn't there? I'm not, as deep in the law as you are, Nick, but there's, Mary Magdalene.
Probably are.
One is the kind of uber whore of the New Testament, isn't she?
I'm pretty sure you can't say whatever you just said, but I'm not a Catholic. I'm a mere Protestant. But that was. Shocking.
All right. Well, maybe somebody could write in and explain that to us. Daily Mail again, Josh, the worrying news that food banks are offering to eat people's pets. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Nearly. Although that might be the solution. Pet owners turn to animal food banks as they struggle with the cost of living crisis, which has seen the price of pet food soar 58%. So that is a big jump. They're saying, the RSPCA saying 1 in 8 people are finding it hard to pay for their pets, of course, because you've also got going to the vet, which is very, very expensive,
That
I
is
understand.
expensive,
I do not have pets very deliberately for that reason, and because I've got too many children.
Just 30 seconds on this now.
Yeah, and but I think it's a good idea. I think maybe combine the two.
Yeah.
They don't want you to have pets today because they're bad for the environment, the WEF, all
I
those
think
people.
it's certainly worth bearing in mind when you buy a dog, recognise that their appetites do reflect their size very substantially. We didn't think about that.
I've just realised...
Retrievers, it costs slightly more than a human being to raise.
That thing about Mary Magdalene probably wasn't that bad. It was just the way you said it, I've realised.
OK.
It's lascivious.
Show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Tuesday's front pages. Daily Mail, hundreds of high-risk flights land in the UK unchecked, private jets. Telegraph, US moves to block Israeli offensive. The Guardian, stand with me, Yulia Navalnaya vows to continue her husband's fight. The Express, Prime Minister, I know it's been tough, but our plan will boost Britain. iNews, Labour set to pledge triple lock on UK state pension. And finally, the Daily Star, Indiana Jones and the indomitable Mrs. Mop, about the Holy Grail. Those were your front pages. That's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Josh and Nick. I'll be back tomorrow at 11 p.m. with Leo Kearse and Lewis Schaefer. If you're watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast. Otherwise, thank you and good night.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. I'm Alex Burkill. Here's your latest GB News weather update. There will be a spell of wet and windy weather for many of us tomorrow, but before that, we do have a relatively quiet night ahead. That's because we have high pressure to the south of us, which is keeping our weather largely settled. That being said, a weak front is pushing its way eastwards across Scotland this evening,